Can you, there we go.
Yes.
Thank you. This is our add-on session to the four-session presentation that I've done through the month of February on karma and emptiness. And so we're adding this session on to try to focus on two of the three meditation practices that are um, the focus or sort of the end game of the presentation that I've done. Um, the end game meaning after we've listened to all of the foundational presentation that I've done so far, where we try to understand how karma and emptiness are related, and specifically how that leads to doing meditations or motivation to doing meditations on emptiness, um, can hopefully you can see clearly now that by doing these kinds of meditations, it is a real instrument, a real tool to help us end suffering existence. So it's an essential part of the Buddhist path. In our tradition, especially when we talk about the three principal paths, three principal teachings, I should say, of the five paths that we follow, renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom, then this is the focus. The last is our, meaning wisdom. The wisdom specifically of emptiness is our focus for this uh, series. So let me just put the screen on. Let me share this. Okay, let me close that window. So this is that fifth session, as I said. And as we talked about already, Um, we've already worked on trying to frame out, looking at the Four Noble Truths through the lens of the Wheel of Life, specifically the 12 links of dependent origination, specifically the three poisons as well, and how the first link of ignorance, where the three poisons originate, lead to karmic imprints, lead to ignorance of how we see things mistakenly, and that there are teachings that address this ignorance very specifically, and they're the ones I've mentioned. I've cut and pasted this from the very first session that we did. And then, of course, there's the prescribed medication or antidote, or the specific meditation practices on emptiness. Last session, we delved into looking at sevenfold reasoning. And then the other two, which I have highlighted here on the screen, are diamond slivers, which we'll get into tonight. And if, as we have time, we'll touch on at least understanding the framework of dependent origination, because that's the one that is really considered the sort of royal, or what some people call the monarch um, presentation on for meditations using reasoning to analyze the object of negation, which is inherent existence. So we'll go into all that, but I will mention right at the beginning that we're only touching these three meditation practices like on the very surface. Mostly my focus is to give you an overview so you understand how they work. The sevenfold reasoning has the seven um, reasoned analysis. Um, and then we presented some offshoots of that last week. Nagarjuna's 4 and 5 um, level reasoning processes, which actually came first, and then came Chandrakirti's sevenfold reasoning. Um, so we can't really delve into each one of these in great depth. So, my goal tonight is to present you with an overview of these two meditation techniques, and then hopefully that encourages you to explore further um, all three of them. I mentioned here on the screen a couple of texts which are pretty well known, where within these texts, especially Meditation on Emptiness by Jeffrey Hopkins, um, and then I should say Chandra Kirti's. Let me fix that. Sevenfold Reasoning, but especially Meditation on Emptiness. It has all of these meditations. Um, Hopkins can be sort of dense reading because he's an academic, but very thorough, very authentic, and very dependable. And hopefully, with some of the basis that I've given in this course, when you maybe go take a look at that text, if you choose to explore further using that text, you'll be able to make better sense of it as a result of this course. That's my hope. Same thing with Chandra Kirti's Sevenfold Reasoning, Meditation on the Selflessness of Persons by Joe Wilson. It's a very slim volume, but it does focus on this one of the three. It too can be very um, mm, dense from a presentation point of view. But again, hopefully the presentation that we've done during this series will help that volume to be more clear. And of course, there's other texts to explore, not the least of which is Jason Kappa's uh, uh, last section of Islam Ramchima on serenity and insight. But there's many other texts as well. So I put those two because I feel like they're a good place to specifically go if you are not familiar with them after having a taste of these three via this course. So we'll start by talking about how to refute the inherent existence of persons, because that's what we're really focused on here as we move into diamond slivers. Um, So, meditation on a person's basis of designation. Remember, we talked about this last time. There's the base object of negation, and then there's the basis of designation. The basis of designation are the three bulleted listed items there. These are the common basis that we impute, label ourselves, persons, and all phenomena with. So this is what we're focused on in these meditations. And when we're able to really negate um, the or refute inherent existence of persons in this way, as I say on there on the screen, by doing this, we samsara, or suffering existence, actually starts to crumble. And I talked a lot about that in the last session in terms of the effects of what actually starts to happen when one moves into the space of working with these meditations. So that's kind of a reminder. So as we move into diamond slivers, just another reminder, we always have to stay focused on what all these reasoning meditations on emptiness are focused on. One thing, object of negation, which is inherent existence, and does it exist? So we start this particular uh, dive into diamond slivers by quoting Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa. And this directly relates to diamond slivers as a meditative tool. When such things as seeds and fuel are seen as heard to be performing the actions of giving rise to such things as sprouts, that's in relationship to seeds, obviously, and fire, in relationship to fuel, grasping the object of negation is to grasp both cause and effect, not as merely nominally inputted, as we've been learning during this course, or as the object that are the basis of that nominal imputation, which we've been learning during this course, but rather as inherently existent produced and producer, meaning the seed and the sprout, meaning fuel and fire. So hopefully by having taken the course so far, this verse has some real depth of meaning. And it leads us right into understanding the arguments that are presented, the reasonings that are presented in diamond slivers. So we have to remember that nominal imputation, designated by name and concept, is what we're really working with here. And in the context of this verse, when we talk about nominal imputation, it means designated by name and concept, as I said. And remember, that is very much connected to the initial manifestation of conventional reality in the form of rebirth, when we talked about the 12 links of dependent origination. First ignorance, and then karmic formations, and then uh, we had cause, cause consequences and resultant consequences, and then we have name and concept that occur. So this is what we're talking about here. When both the causes, such as seeds and fuel, and the effects, sprouts and fire, are held to have their own essence, independent of everything else, um, including mere nominal imputation, they are grasped as inherently existent. So that's what this verse that we're reading here by Sankapa is telling us. And so when we look at a thing as if a thing, anything, existed within inherently, it could only exist uh, either from a cause, as we're talking about this verse as a meditative process, or um, without a cause. So if it arises from a cause, um, its effect must be, they're listed here, inherently the same as the cause. That means arising from itself. That's the first diamond sliver. Second one is inherently different from the cause, arising from other. Here, other, it's important to understand that we mean by other, um, that it is inherent self-existing other, not dependently arising other. That's just very much important to understand. If you don't, you could then get that mix-up going on in terms of what the object of negation always is in all these meditations, inherent existence. So it's arising from an inherent existent other. Very important. The same thing for number three, both arising inherently, um, both arising inherently from both self and other. So that is basically saying like one and two coming from both. And then the fourth is like there's no cause. It just arises randomly. So if something were to exist, then this is when we talk about cause and effect as using those as our process of rational reasoned analysis, then these are the four um, slivers. So here we simply are telling us that diamond slivers is just as a fragment, where the name comes from. It's just as a fragment of a diamond is strong and can easily cut a hard object. Each of its four, meaning the diamond slivers, reasonings, each of its four reasons decisively contradicts inherent existence. So that's why this is a meditation tool that we use to eliminate um, that uh, mis mistaken arising that we constantly are experiencing of things having inherent existence. Um, so that takes us further. So here we'll go through a few verses in terms of where diamond slivers originated from. And diamond slivers is such an important meditation practice that in the very first verse of Nagarjuna's treatise on the Middle Way, very first verse, he, he states it. neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause. There they are, the four slivers. Does anything anywhere ever arise? Of course, you now know that that kind of language shouldn't confuse you. You know, the subtext there is, does anything anywhere ever arise inherently, right? And then the root of reasoning used in diamond slivers comes from the sutras. There's two verses here. The first is getting more at the object that we use in the negation, and then the second is very literally what we're using in terms of the four proofs. So the first one is, for instance, there's a sprout where there is a seed. That which is seed is not itself the sprout, neither is it other than that. Those are the first two slivers right there. Nor is it that itself. Thus, the reality, dharmata, is not annihilated and not eternal. It's stating the middle way right there. You guys should understand that kind of this specific verse based on what I've shared with us in the previous sessions in terms of the wisdom of the masters. And then specifically, the Rice Seedling Sutra is what the four diamond slivers are literally based on. So we quote that. This sprout, whose cause is a seed and which arises, is not created by itself, not created by other, not created by both, nor arisen within, without a cause, nor arisen from God, time, atoms, nature, or self-being. Kind of covers it all. But you can see the four rational reasons in there. Chandrakirti puts it in the form of a syllogism, which are a little harder to wrestle with unless you're familiar with Buddhist logic syllogisms. They're even slightly different than the kind that are used in Western philosophy, but we won't go into that. So, but it's very clear here. Chandrakirti's syllogism says, consider a sprout. It does not inherently arise because it does not inherently arise from self, other, both, or without a cause. He's stating the four reasons why a sprout does not inherently um, exist, because that's what we're considering, right? That's the part A is we're considering a sprout. Part B is how does it actually exist? And stating that it doesn't exist a certain way, that's the negation. It's in the form of a negation. And then it tells you why. So note here, other, and I already underscored this earlier, other, when we see that, means inherently separate other, not dependent arising other. Please don't forget that. That's the most important one in all the four reasonings. So the conclusions reached by meditating using any one of those verses, if you were to take any one of those verses into meditation, and we'll talk about like how you actually break that down and do it um, over the next 15 minutes or so. Um, but I share with you, once you do that, what are the conclusions that you will reach? And these are the four conclusions that Diamond Slivers meditation will bring to your mind, that a thing does not arise from itself. A thing does not inherently arise from other. A thing does not arise from both itself and other. A thing does not arise without any cause. And that proves that a sprout, because that's what we're talking about here, the rice seedling um, sutra, it proves that a sprout does not inherently exist. It's not just that sutra, it's any using any one of these verses that we just went through. So that's what this meditation does. we'll again go into it in a moment, a little bit more deeply. So it does not inherently arise. It does not inherently exist. If it did, it would have to arise from itself, arise from other, an inherently existing other, remember, arise from both, or causelessly arise. And then so what we're going to do now is we're going to take each one of these reasonings and walk through them. And these are the ways that you would want to take any one of these verses into an actual analytical meditation session with as much focus concentration as you can. Um, and then once you realize the results of that analytical meditation, bring that into um, uh, simply resting with the result in single pointed concentration or serenity. So, relating to these four diamond slivers, this is now we're going to take the closer look. So, let me just get to the right location here in my notes. Helps me to keep on track. So, here, um, the first one is, does the effect exist in the cause? So we start by looking at Chandrakirti's another verse by Chandrakirti where he says, because the effect can be seen. We're actually observing here with conventional uh, awareness, because the effect can be seen when the cause is no more. So this is like, remember, keep the sprout and the seed in mind. The cause is the seed, and it's when the seed is no more, the effect or result, which is the sprout, can be seen. Even ordinary people. So we're talking about the ordinary perception here. Do not accept um, these two are the same. So this goes to answering the question, does the effect exist in the cause? Thus the postulation that things originate from themselves is untenable, ultimately, as well as in everyday experiences. So this is really an important statement of how one has to wrap one's mind around um, the answer to this question. Um, if the sprout existed in the seed, again, we're talking about the cause and effect, the seed and the sprout. Then the seed and the sprout, we're talking about inherently exist. They would not, if they existed at the same time, they would not be related as cause and effect. One can't see them at the same time, can you? Once the seed is finished, then we can see the result, which is the sprout. Because that would mean also, just to use a different example, that an old man like myself would be um, looked at as in this example as being the result or the effect, um, would exist in an unmanifested manner in a newborn baby, which is the cause, at the same time. But a fully formed result existing at the same time as a cause, we can observe rationally and logically that that's not the case. The result still needs to arise after the cause no longer, or as Chandrakirti puts it here, no more. Um, and if you were to think that that was possible, that the effect exists in the cause, um, several unwanted um, consequences would follow. And this would be part of your meditation too, when you're looking at a verse like Chandrakirti's. The sprout, which is the effect, would exist at the time of its cause, the seed. is what we just talked about. And since they are related dependently, right? We can all see that they're dependently related, um, that they could exist at the same time is not, it's not, we don't see that. It's not actually possible. There would be no dependent arising then. The seed would not produce the result of the sprout if they were both independently, inherently existing and not in a dependent relationship. The sprout would not need to even arise from a seed if it had inherent self-existence because it wouldn't depend on the seed to arise. It would already arise. It would already exist. Um, its arising would be senseless because arising means something new comes into existence. But the sprout would already exist, like I said. And then another fault of this kind of thinking, if you were to accept that does the effect exist in the cause? If the cause and the effect existed simultaneously, such that a sprout existed inside a seed, then even after the sprout arises, okay, the seed would still exist. So that's what Chandrakirti is addressing there in the first line. The seed no longer it exists, but if it did, it would exist. Um, it would continue to exist even after the sprout showed itself. So existing simultaneously is sort of silly. They don't exist simultaneously. Um, and in that case, if it were though, they were talking about the seed continuing to exist, it could continue to exist and continue to produce sprouts, one after the other, endlessly, because the seed would never cease when its result arose. There's many more other faults with this kind of thinking that um, does the effect exist in the cause as we're using a seed and a sprout as the example. We would be able to see the seed and its resultant sprout at the same time, which we can't. The producer, the seed, and its product, the sprout, would be exactly the same. If the sprout were inherently one nature with the seed, they would be exactly the same. In that case, we could not differentiate the seed from the sprout. And then the last fault would be if the seed and the sprout are one nature and exist at the same time, then just as conventionally the seed cannot be apprehended after the sprout arises, so too the sprout should not be apprehended after it arises. So some of these faults takes our mind some getting used to. If any of you are experienced with these meditations, then you already know what I'm talking about. And then for some of you, maybe who are hearing these for the first time, they kind of hurt your head a little bit because we don't think this way normally. These are constructs that are put together for an analytical meditative purpose to break down our seeing the object of negation, inherent existence, being present in the the basis of designation, which here is cause and effect in the form of a seed and a sprout. So it sounds simple, but you have to connect the thought process together that way. That's the way it makes sense to make arise in your mind that the last line of Chandrakirti's verse is true. It then is just untenable, ultimately, that anything can originate um, not just a sprout and a seed and a sprout from themselves. It's just untenable. So this kind of goes to giving you a little taste. Again, that's the purpose of like introducing you to diamond slivers. Okay, what exactly is it? Uh, these four uh, arguments that are directly related to cause and effect. In a sevenfold reasoning, we used uh, the object of negation um, was inherent existence, same thing. And then the object that we were focused on was a car, and then the basis of designation, its parts. So that was using a, a different set of criteria. So you can see the difference, hopefully. Not too hard, I think, to see. And we'll go to the second one. Do things arise from an inherently existent other? Remember, underlined inherently existent, not just dependently arising other. So Nagarjuna says if cause and effect were inherently different, causes and non-causes would be alike. Chandrakirti says, the more verses for you, anything could arise from anything else because all non-producers would be equivalent in that they are others. Again, that might hurt your brain a little bit, but we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. Another verse from Chandrakirti says, things different from each other by their own characteristics could not logically be part of the same continuum. Another one, if things, miscellaneous factors, sprouts, and so forth, have inherent nature, then what need have those existing things for causes and conditions? It's one of my favorites because, like, if you think about that, it's true. But then you turn around and you look at everything, every second of existence, and it's all everything's arising out of causes and conditions. So if everything basically inherently existed, there'd be no need for any dependent arising events whatsoever. And we know the opposite to be true. One cancels out the other. That's a hint about, by the way, how dependent arising meditations work. Very direct, very direct. So Jason Kappa says of Buddha Palita in his Ocean of Reasoning, another quote for you. Buddha Palita says, nor do things arise from others because then anything could arise from anything. That would be very interesting, right? So understand that all things, self and all phenomena, necessitates a dependent relationship between cause and its effect. As one ceases, the other arises. So here I talk about going beyond the sprout. And what I mean by that is that once one gets familiar with just utilizing these four reasonings in connection with a sprout, a seed in its sprout, then one can apply it to anything. There isn't anything that you cannot apply it to. And that's the beauty of this kind of meditation. It is really, really very powerful in that regard. Um, because obviously you don't want to limit it to just talking about a sprout. So, um, so here, when we talk about this particular argument, we always talk about like what if it were true that it could arise from something other than the sprout arise from something other in this case, then you always have to look at what the unwanted consequences of that arising from other is. And this helps really fortify your resultant affirmation at the end of this kind of a rational walkthrough, reasoned walkthrough, that a sprout could not arise from other. So here are some of the ways that a sprout cannot arise from others. If it did, the problems that would arise, I should say. A sprout could arise from anything because all other phenomena would equally be inherently other, just as the seed is inherently other than the sprout. This goes to one of the verses that I just read. A sprout that is in the process of arising and that is inherently other than the seed would already exist at the time of the seed, making cause and effect simultaneous. That doesn't make any sense. While conventional things can be other and not exist at the same time, we're not talking about inherently existing others. Inherently existing things would have to exist at the same time to be considered other. This is because anything that has an independent essence has attained its own entity, so it already exists. It's not going to be arising. It's not going to be so this starts to become a problem if we think that a sprout can arise from other. A sprout that inherently, a sprout that is in the process of arising and that in inherently other than a seed would already exist and should be perceptible, although it hasn't yet arisen. Is back to what Chandrakirti was talking about. A sprout that is about to arise and that is inherently other than a seed does not need to arise because it already has attained its entity. An inherently existent sprout that does not exist in the present cannot have a cause that is inherently other because the two things, to be inherently other, would have to exist at the same time. An inherently existent sprout could never arise because the seed, being unaffected by causes and conditions, would be permanent and unchanging. If the seed were permanent, it would not cease after producing the sprout, so it would continue to produce more and more sprouts. We talked about this a moment ago. Or if the seed did not produce anything because it was permanent, then it could never produce a sprout at all, period. So these are all parts of the reasoning that you would want to apply in the form of unwanted consequences. This kind of thinking is the kind of thinking that you bring into your analytical meditation. Um, so that kind of brings us to the third um, point, which is refuting that the object can arise from both itself and other. So Chandrakirti says here, arising from both itself and other is not logical, for it is vulnerable to the objections already raised meaning point number one and number two. This is found neither in the world, meaning conventional reality, nor accepted in terms of suchness or ultimate reality. For arising is untenable in terms of either pole of itself or others. So here it's pretty much reliant. This particular point is pretty much reliant on having worked thoroughly through the first two reasons, the first two reasonings. If you've done that, when you get to this one, it would be like, well, if it doesn't, if I've affirmed clearly that it does not arise from um, one of the first two reasons, then when we put those two together, meaning from itself or other, then it's going to be pretty easy to determine that this is the case. So here we move to the fourth one. Sorry, that should say arise, left off the E. Do things arise randomly without a cause? So here you have a lot of uh I think you could have a lot of fun with this one in the sense that I don't think most of us think that things arise randomly. I think most of us understand cause and effect. But if you did, we could look at the faults to contemplate if things arose without a cause. Nothing would arise because there would be nothing to care. Cause, should say cause. Little typo there. There would be nothing to cause it to come into existence. Everything would be frozen, if you will, because everything would just inherently exist. Again, this tips you into like the realization that nothing could possibly exist if it wasn't just dependently arising, which means that nothing could inherently exist. It's very, very clear. Another fault to contemplate is things would arise chaotically and unpredictably if there wasn't cause and effect. All efforts to attain certain goals would be useless because things would come about causelessly or randomly. So why make an effort to do to do anything? Why practice virtue versus non-virtue, etc. And the last one here is there would be no way to stop undesirable results by eliminating their causes and conditions. So these are some of the faults that one examines in connection with the fourth one. So after examining these points, you can conclude that nothing can arise without causes that have the capacity to produce them. So this is where um, once one gets a good handle on these four reasonings, and then the faults that lie within each one of them, if they were true, then one could apply diamond slivers, as I said earlier, to just about anything. Um, and that's really one of the meditations that you can utilize. And so a typical um, meditation that one could do is like on the universe, but you could apply this to really, like I said, anything. So, this is like a typical big question, right? Like, if we apply diamond slivers to analyzing like the beginning of the universe, um, before which nothing existed, or did nothing exist before the beginning of the universe? And if you think that, then this belief is based on accepting inherent existence. We assume that there was a unique, definable moment in which an inherent existent universe appeared. You could also apply that to yourself. We talked a lot about that in the previous sessions. So the way you do this kind of reflection would be as follows. I don't have it written down. I don't think I have it written down on the screen here. No. So as you put the universe in its and did it exist um, before an inherent self-existent moment event occurred? Let's say like the Big Bang. Um, First thing you put in your mind is a findable, inherently existent beginning caused or uncaused? And then from there, you move to if an inherently existent beginning has no cause, then how did the universe arise? Again, you can contemplate, per the last argument, the unwanted consequences. You can contemplate the consequences of causelessly arising. I think we could all see that would be pretty silly. How could the universe arise as we know it? Um, you could look at Spinoza's, theory of like the manifestation of the universe being beauty and all unified. Einstein's theory of general relativity relies heavily on that, for those of you familiar with physics. And then the third point you would bring into your mind is if causelessly arising is intentable, which I just kind of poo-pooed it, right? But you'd want to conclude that yourself. And the universe must have had a cause. Did it arise from itself? So now you can go right back to the first question of diamond slivers. Was it already present before the Big Bang? The universe arising from a permanent, inherently existing cosmic substance would be an example of arising from itself. Is that tenable? And then next, you would say, was a universe arising caused by something other, inherently existing other, by the way? For example, a divine creator. And then last, you would say, did it arise from both itself and others? So you could see how you could take any object. You could take yourself, you could take a sprout, you can take the universe and put it under the lens of um, this kind of analysis of using cause and result um, in the form of this fourfold meditative process. So here, I just want to talk for a moment about like the benefits of meditating on diamond slivers. So using the reasons analysis and again applying it to everything. You as a Dharma practitioner, you can really focus in on on topics like how happiness and suffering arise, the process of how we are born in samsara. We've spent a lot of time on that one in our previous sessions, talking about the 12 links of dependent origination, especially the first four. How certain Dharma practices lead to specific results. So here, we're just saying that I'm putting up something to hopefully motivate you that take a look at working with diamond slivers as a meditation practice because it really shines a light. It shines a light on our preconceptions and mistaken ideas of how happiness and suffering, ourselves and the world around us, come into being. And it helps us to identify a realistic way in which things arise and dispel wrong views that limit our, if we're Buddhist, our practice of um, moving along on the path. And it also leads us to understanding the nature of reality, which is that all things lack inherent self-existence. Um, and these realizations are the kind of thing we talked about this before. These kind of realizations bring you to eventually not only to peaceful states of mind, but to nirvana, to liberation. So this is something to hopefully motivate you to dive a little deeper into utilizing diamond slivers as a meditative tool. Um, and this analysis of diamond slivers also um, is a way to help us understand with clarity mindfulness. Like in every single moment, you will develop a very acute and sharp awareness that even in the most minute um, event that is coming onto your mental or conscious horizon, in all of your actions of body, speech, and mind, in every single moment, even the smallest moments you could imagine, is all as a result of cause and effect. Um, and it's very powerful because normally we're not walking around thinking about that. And it does provide a lot of motivation um, for doing these kind of meditations. So so to prepare to do meditations on diamond slivers, I'm going to take this what you're seeing on the screen here, especially the verses that I read through previously, and I'll have Gloria put them the listing page on the calendar at DNKL so that you can pick it up. But this will help you review all this kind of walkthrough that I've done here, and this will help you to get a handle on how you could actually take any one of the verses from these masters that I've mentioned earlier and I've been quoting sporadically throughout, and how do you actually meditate on them? How do you actually meditate on them? That's the most important thing to understand. Um, so the first thing that you want to do when you're preparing for using this kind of analysis of cause and effect, um, and you just want to hold in your mind the four different options. Can something arise from itself, from other, from both, or causelessly? That's like a mantra. Um, and then you pick an object that you want to meditate on. And again, it could be anything. It could be a tree, it could be poverty, it could be your precious human life, it could be consciousness dependently arising, um, one of your sense faculties, a preceding moment of consciousness, um, anger arising from something specific that you've experienced. Anything that has a sequence of cause and effect that you can use your mindfulness of being aware of cause and effect. And then you can start to put that into this fourfold meditative walkthrough. Um, Examine it in these four ways. And then if you do that clearly and thoroughly, then at the end, after seeing that none of these four ways of arising um, uh, is possible from an inherently existing arising point of view, and that you realize that you're experiencing them that way is just your self-grasping. You go back to your knowledge of like where this comes from. Ignorance, grasping at things through mistakenly identifying them the way you do, having inherent self-existence. And then that's the object that you take into, you drop the analytical meditation at that point and just rest, be at one with that awareness. You release the grasping at inherent existent arising because you've just done this thorough analysis where it isn't possible to be present. All things are dependently arising. This is very clear to your mind, and inherent self-existence is absent. Conventionally, things are dependently arising. And you try to prolong that experience as long as you can. That's where you're using single pointed concentration or serenity, as Jason Kappa calls it, and that will amplify and deepen and add clarity to your experience of the lack of inherent self-existence, which is emptiness, right? So if you lose that while you're doing a meditation, if you lose that, then that awareness, then you try to stay in meditation if you're not tired of meditating and go back into the analysis that you've just completed and bring it back into focus. Um, and then try to stay with that experience of emptiness as long as you can. It will arise, and just try to stay with it as long as you can. And that's really how you do this kind of meditation. The reasoning is only the analytical part of the meditation, and it then brings um, a clarity, a reasoned clarity that and only that analysis can bring. And then you sit with it. You drop the analysis and just sit with it. That is really the practice of meditation on emptiness. You won't make any progress if you don't do the last part, which is moving into that state of serenity, single point of concentration on the results of that analytical meditation. Sorry, I have a little congestion. So this is what the benefit of the meditation on diamond slivers really is. Um, so that kind of walkthrough is really important to understand. And the same thing applies to what we went through last week, which was the sevenfold reasoning. You have to go through the analytical. Remember, these are analytical meditations. You have to understand the reasonings of each one of them. Sevenfold has seven reasonings. Remember, they all seven can be boiled down to the first two. Diamond Slivers has these four. And of the four, by the way, the most important one is is the second one. And that will become apparent to you the more you do it. That's the one that needs the most clarity in terms of analysis. So that would take you through our my introduction for you to diamond slivers as a meditative tool. And I'll pause here before I go into doing a quick review of dependent arising. Dependent arising is a big topic, and we'll go into it again where I'm just giving you a view, a framework view of like how what it is and how it works, if you will. And we'll read through some verses that you can utilize in that. But before I do that, are there any questions that anybody has about what I presented so far this evening? Linda, you're we
Maybe
can't hear you.
unmuted.
Go
I'm
ahead.
guessing that this question reflects my ignorance, but and I have a really hard time articulating this question, but I certainly get Madhyamaka reasoning. But if samsara crumbles with Madhyamaka reasoning, why do we need Mahayana or Vajrayana teachings? I mean, why do we need these teachings to crumble samsara? In other words, can this be used by secular practitioners? Is that how they identify and maybe succeed as secular practitioners? This has always been a question for me. But this can maybe result in nefarious actions. As an extreme example, I think of Milarepa Baba. I guess my question is, what's the link between Mahayana and serious Buddhist practice? Maybe it's Hinayana practice, but it seems like you can use this without Mahayana, and I guess I'm not getting it.
Yes, you can. There's no doubt about it. Even just within the Buddhist pantheon of practitioners, and we silo them into different types, right?
Right.
And when we talk about Theravada or Hinayana, or we talk about Mahayana or Vajrayana,
Or secular, which I truly don't get.
yeah, yeah. But let's just stay within um,
The
Buddhist
Buddhist one.
Buddhist
Okay.
framework, and then we'll go to secular. There's a lot of ingredients that exist in the Mahayana um, formula, if you will, for um, traveling the path to liberation, to ending suffering, existence. And emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness, and from a sutra point of view, it is like, the centerpiece is the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. And then many of the masters, the ones we're analyzing and touching upon in these teachings, um, articulate really the essence of what the Buddha had to disseminate in that. And then they are giving us a specific set of tools to work with that, meaning these reasonings that analyze the ultimate, right? That's what we're labeling them. So when we just talk about that wisdom of emptiness, trying to attain that, that's one pillar. of Mahayana practice. The other two major pillars, it goes all the way back to the root of all Buddhist paths, which is the Four Noble Truths, but experiencing the Four Noble Truths through not only the lens of renunciation and then making paramount and most important your practice of ethical and moral discipline, and basing your practice on that along with emptiness, but then having an awareness of the Four Noble Truths through the lens of suffering of samsara for all sentient beings. The other major component of Mahayana Buddhism is making a core centerpiece, technology and tool wise. We're talking about meditative, all the way through meditative practice, bodhicitta, specifically and skillfully conjoined with wisdom, meditations on wisdom. These are the two. There's other ingredients, especially renunciation, which is common to all Buddhist practice. But these two put together in a very specific way that have been nurtured in the Mahayana tradition um, are essential for this path. Now, you could be a Hinayana practitioner, and of course you have bodhicitta. That's not the question. But the meditative practices on emptiness are slightly different. Um, they lead to a certain um, place along the path that can lead to liberation. In Buddhism, we call them the two types there, learners, um, hearers, sorry, those who listen to the Dharma and can attain a state of liberation. And then there's the self-made Buddhas, um, solitary realizers. Then they can reach a state of liberation using their, of course, these kind of meditation practices, but they're not necessarily putting that together in a way that utilizes and works with the other parts of what is available in the Mahayana path, especially bodhicitta. So when we talk about the two wings of practice in Mahayana tradition, bodhicitta and emptiness, without the two, you will not take flight if you choose to take that path. Because that's the other main path from a Sutrayana point of view. I just talked about hearers and solitary realizers. The other main path, which is practiced by Mahayana Buddhists, is the path of the Bodhisattva. All three can lead to liberation, but liberation is not Buddhahood. There's nuances that are still present in all three streams that have different qualities. So there isn't some unified state of liberation that Buddhists in these different practices all come to the same point. They eventually do, but as they might be manifesting their practice in a very specific way, they're moving along on the path, and they'll eventually all get to the point of reaching the path of no more learning. Because that also then brings me to talk about Vajrayana. Vajrayana uses meditation on emptiness in a very different way than Sutrayana. Negating emptiness is not the absence of inherent existence, it's the manifestation of the idam.
Right.
So it is very different. So they all lead the same way, they just look different. And I contend, I'm not speaking for any Buddhist teacher, including my teachers, when I say the following. When we talk about like secular, meaning non-Buddhist practitioners, most practitioners um, on other spiritual paths don't directly utilize meditations on emptiness. It's not mainstream, and many others, of those paths don't might be theistic. They might not be theistic. Buddhism's not theistic. Um, so there's a,
I'm actually talking about people in my Sangha who identify themselves as secular Buddhists that I don't
so
understand.
when you say secular Buddhist, for my edification, can you like articulate When you say those words, what do you mean?
Like
Secular meaning they don't identify as with a specific lineage or a specific methodology of practice, Mahayana, Theravada, and Hinayana, like,
they don't think devotion and yidams are important and all that kind of thing. So, uh,
so then secular means,
is there such a thing? I don't even know.
yeah. So yeah, so I mean that goes to all those other ingredients as I was talking about. A Mahayana practitioner is utilizing, um, hopefully very clearly, meaning having a very clear understanding of doing practices that actually um, are based on going for refuge to the three jewels, and that is a combination of that's based on having a understanding, fundamental understanding of the Four Noble Truths, because that creates two things in one's mind stream: fear of samsaric existence, but then combined with having faith that the Buddhist path, therefore the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are a place to go take refuge. This is has to be a daily active practice. Then conjoined with that, one learns practices that have to do with what we call purification and have to do with uh, the accumulation of virtue and or merit, and that these all involve so-called practices of devotion. I don't like that word, but practices where we engage with uh, making offerings, prostrations, confession. The seven limb practice in Vajrayana, this called the seven purities. Then these are all like very important ingredients. They're almost more important than the main practices in Mahayana Buddhism. So there's lots of difference between people don't, if there are people like maybe you label as secular, who some of those things aren't as important, or maybe they don't even, you know, think they give any weight to those, some of the, or all of those things, then our tradition would contend that you can't make any progress or very little progress. So there's a story told by uh, about Jason Kappa, who was had direct communication with Manjushri, and Manjushri told him, "Your understanding of emptiness is not perfect," and he's already this learned scholar. He can defeat anybody in debate. His treatises are like lockdown perfect. And Jason Kappa said, what do I need to do? And Manjushri said, you need to do more purification practice. And he was talking specifically about Vajrasattva purification. So when Jason Kappa went into retreat with his 8 disciples, they focused their practice, 3-year retreat, great retreat on purification practice. And then, so balance of time, more time on that. So 100% time, maybe it was 80%, then 20% on the practice. Emptiness was the practice. And then the emptiness came, perfect realization of emptiness because of purification practice. So in Mahayana Buddhism, whether it's the Sutrayana or Vajrayana path, then all these practices are knitted together, skillfully applied. Meditations on the six perfections, to develop bodhicitta. Then these are essential. Um, so, I can't speak too much more about it, I think, because it's hard to know exactly what certain maybe members of the Sangha that you're talking about really think in terms of details of these kinds of things. So I'm kind of rambling in a generalized way to maybe give you something to grab onto.
But does Madhyamaka reasoning support a secular approach to Buddhism?
Um,
I mean, the reasoning is elegant. There's no question.
yeah. I would say that you're talking about Mahayamika Prasangika view, which is the Galupa view, or are you talking about Mahayana view in general?
I don't know enough to answer that question.
That's okay. Because there's all different, from an emptiness point of view, we didn't get too much into it in this course because it would get us bogged down. But there are different schools um, that have different views on what is emptiness. And then from a Mahayamika Prasangika point of view, which is the Lupa school, then the prescribed um, practices are are a combination of all these things that I jumped around and touched on, but done skillfully and in a way that could create the foundation to um, then be able to move into specific practices. So in our tradition, the three principal um, uh, teachings on renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom are essential. If you leave one of them out, your foundation has a giant hole in it. So I think that kind of answers the question. Um, then making room for like secular Buddhism, I think if a secular Buddhist like is spending time like skillfully learning and developing in really good, maybe deep meditative equipoise, these kind of practices, then I'm just sure there's benefit, but it won't look um, like the practice that a Mahayamika Prasangika practitioner practices. It just looks different. That's all I could say. I can't judge it any further than that, but it definitely is different. It's not the same. And
Okay.
maybe Jason Kappa's story is a signpost, like, maybe you can get so far with that, but you're eventually going to have to do these other practices, even if you don't do them now. Maybe if you're a Buddhist and you believe in reincarnation, then maybe in a future life, you know.
So maybe you're more stuck if on the path if you don't have the other portions
Well,
of it.
my teachers have told me that it could be the obstacle. Like the Jason Kappa story is really important from our point of view as a lineage. That that could be a real obstacle. Let's put it that way. So get stuck, that's another word for obstacle, right? It could block you from really having the real profound realizations that these kind of meditations offer.
Right.
And my teachers have always told me that you need to spend more time doing the preliminary practices, whether it's in Vajrayana and Sutrayana. And if you look at any of the practices that exist, like in our tradition, they always start with some kind of purification practice, uh, a collecting merit practice.
Mm.
Then you do the main practice. If you do the main practice in our tradition without those preliminary practices, which you should not be dismissive of or ignore or don't do, it's okay if I don't do them. Like the Jason Kappa story, it's important. It's more important to do them, especially as a beginner. And I've been practicing for 30 years. I still consider myself a beginner. I'm not ready to leave those. I have a deeper, deeper appreciation for those kind of practices than the quote main practices, which we would consider these meditations on emptiness, meditations on bodhicitta, and then of course um, tantric meditations if you happen to be a tantric Vajrayana practitioner. So I mean, I that's how deeply I feel about it, and that's the view that I've been taught.
Right. And Nagarjuna was teaching this to bodhisattvas, so it wasn't like he's talking to regular people.
Yeah, the regular people. Yeah. Hopefully all of us are bodhisattvas and
Well, I
we
mean,
yeah.
the people have been already
Yes, I know. I know what you meant. Yeah.
it was in a
Let me just see.
monastery, right?
Yeah, let me see what other questions are on here. Yeah, it's true. Comment that was in the uh so then one of the other comments in the chat was from Karen. She said Lama Suradas. Dzogchen practitioner, introduced Buddhism to a group I attended at a wisdom tradition as opposed to a religious tradition. Yeah. And Lama Surdas is somebody who maybe, Linda, I don't know if you would think of if you know who he is, but
Yeah, I
then
do.
yeah, so then like he might be thought of like as a secular, Buddhist. Another one would be Stephen Batchelor. Stephen Batchelor like was a Buddhist monk, and then he uh, disrobed, was a devout Buddhist practitioner. But he identifies himself as a secular Buddhist, for sure. Uh, but he does all these same kind of practices that are in Sutrayana practice. He has a problem with some of the practices that are done in some of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, which he was a part of, and he's left them on the shelf. He doesn't say anything negative about them. He just says that they never made sense to me, so I put them on the shelf and I move forward. Um, and I'm a big fan of his. So I'm not trying to say that some way is better than another. You know. Uh, Hopefully that helps. Okay, any other questions or comments before we spend a few minutes on just overviewing dependent arising meditation? Okay, so let me just get to where I want it to be here. I lost my place. So here we'll just spend a few minutes on this because we're getting late. Um, so this I already talked through, by the way. I should have had this on the screen when I was doing that last part. So dependent arising. So this is called the monarch of reasonings or the royal of reasonings when we talk about these kinds of reasonings that analyze the ultimate. So why is it called that? It's considered the way that most directly goes right at the heart of being able to eliminate in your mind stream the two extremes of nihilism and absolutism, and that obstruct us from realizing the view of the middle way. We've talked a lot about the middle way, so we don't need to talk about that and how those are two of the things we're trying to not allow ourselves to fall into when we do these kinds of meditations, where they bring us to a point where we eliminate in our minds, we think we're eliminating inherent existence, but we're really eliminating anything existing. Or we can't get there, and then we fall into thinking everything exists inherently. So it's one way that this is different compared to diamond slivers or the sevenfold reasoning, is that uh, it uses the actual clear understanding of dependent arising that leads one to see the ultimate view of all things being lacking inherent existence. But it uses as the tool the sort of that other side, not sort of, the other side of the coin of emptiness, which is dependent arising. Through that, it shows you the clear nature of how all things actually exist conventionally and ultimately. So, in this verse that I put on the screen, I usually have all verses in italics, sorry. This is the opening homage that Nagarjuna includes at the beginning of his uh, treatise on the middle way. I prostrate to the perfect Buddha, the best of all teachers, who taught that that which is dependent arising is without ceasing, without arising, without discontinuation, without permanence, without coming, without going, without difference, without identity, and peaceful, free from conceptual fabrication. So, by praising the Buddha in this way, he teaches us that whatever is dependently arising, all those ingredients, it's called the eight characteristics, which I'll list separately below. They don't have inherent existence. They simply are dependently arising, um, are empty. And this refers to all phenomena, self and all other objects. And those eight characteristics are ceasing, which are in the verse, arising, discontinuation, permanence, coming, going, sorry, difference, and identity. Um, so here he says in his text that all of these have a relation, show that the relationship between all things, but that we mistakenly label all of them or experience them um, by because of ignorance. The first link in the 12 links of dependent origination is having inherent self-existence. So what we develop through this kind of meditation is what is called the wisdom directly knowing the ultimate truth of all dependently arising things by seeing that they all simply dependently arise. There can be no other way that they could exist. That leads to a peaceful, free from conceptual fabrications. That's what is it, how this verse ends. State of mind, free of all conceptualizations. They've all been stopped. So this kind of meditation is very, very powerful. And so this is why it's called the king of the monarch of the royal way of doing reasoned analysis of the ultimate. It shows the relationship of all things, but through that, it it just negates so clearly, so definitively how things cannot exist any other way. And the only other way they could exist would be inherently. Um, so dependent arising proves emptiness in the way that I was just talking about. So a couple of examples here I put on the screen like a baby. Here we're talking about if you think about a a baby for the first time seeing their reflection in a mirror, what appears is a baby. And the baby does not know that the reflected face is not a real face. They experience it that way as a real face from the perspective of their mind. And that doesn't, and that they don't have an awareness that it doesn't exist in any other way than it just being a reflection. They feel like it exists just in the way that they see it, that it inherently exists. This is an analogy. We don't really know what a baby thinks. We're trying to draw the point that this is how we experience things all the time. And so that's the point. Similarly, when we approach something, we aren't aware because we're not using this kind of critical analysis normally. We're not aware that appearance of inherent existence is from the perspective of our mind, that's where it's coming from. Remember the first four links of the 12 links of dependent origination. And in fact, a false appearance and the object is constantly there in our mind, the false appearance of things inherently existing. That gets us all the way to that fourth link of name and concept. That's how things are appearing in our mind. Um, so that's something that we want to just have an appreciation, again, with the few minutes we have left, about what dependent arising meditations are. And I'll give you a quick snapshot of that as best I can through some verses. Aryadeva says, and for
John,
yes,
John, do you think you're showing something, or all I see is the screen, or are other
oh,
people's screen?
oh my goodness, you guys can't see the
No,
screen?
no, we can. I can see your screen just fine.
Oh,
Sorry.
you
Oh,
can. Oh,
Yeah.
I can't. Oh,
oh,
so something's wrong with me. That's okay. I'll listen carefully.
oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Um, I don't know, maybe it's a setting on your, I don't know.
We can try
I'm not,
rejoining. I'm not sure, but I can definitely see John's screen at the moment.
Oh,
does
okay.
everybody else see my screen? Wave. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, good.
oh, okay. So it's me. Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. So his verse says, anything that arises dependently is not independent. All things are not independent. Therefore, there is no inherently existing self. It gets right to the bottom line of what dependent arising meditations accomplish, because that's the result. I'm reading you the result of these meditations. There's three types of dependent arising. There's arising in dependence on causes and conditions, which we spent much time talking about in connection with the first two types of meditations. Existing independence on its parts, that's more specifically sevenfold reasoning, and then designated dependently by being merely inputted in dependence on its basis of designation. That's really very unique to Mahayamika Prasangika point of view. The mere imputation in dependence on its basis of designation. So this has to do with that kind of meditation is the hardest one to do. But when we talk about dependent arising, it's pretty accessible at least because it brings it into our mind in a way that we can at least analyze it. So causal dependence, talking about the first one, we're really talking about causes and conditions. So examples of that would be seen in these kind of verses. Let me just get to where this is sourced from. So this first one that I have up here is actually from Apali's Sutta. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the sensation of this, that ceases. So this is clearly stating causal dependence. When something is occurring, which is this, then that can occur as a result, if you will. So it's very clear. Another one is from Nagarjuna, so from the Mahayana tradition. If you regard all things as existing by virtue of their essence, essence here means inherently existing, then you will regard all things as being without causes and conditions. Come on, folks, we just talked through this. Everything exists through causes and conditions, but if you think anything has an inherent existence, then you can't possibly think that anything exists with causes and conditions. So it's like one is counteracts the other, one annihilates the other. And then this verse is from Lama Tsongkhapa. Thus, essencelessness, talking about the lack of inherent self-existence, is established just by reasoning from this thing we're talking about right now, dependent arising. Thus, just by ascertaining causality, one destroys all apparitions grasped as truly existent. From that point on, all of the antithesis of the right view are cut off. So here he's talking about the causal type of meditations that we can do on dependent arising. And then the second type of dependent arising is called mutual dependence. And here we'll use two verses. These are two verses also from Nagarjuna. When there is this, that exists. Sounds familiar, right? Just as when there is long, there is short. When this is produced, that arises. And we're talking about this and that here. Just as when a lamp's flame is produced, light arises. Where there is long, there is short. They do not inherently exist. And when a lamp's flame is not produced, a light also does not arise. So this should be very clear, like what that really is talking about. Mutual dependence is a little different than causal dependence. Here, one relies in a mutual way on the other to occur. It's a little different than cause and effect, which, we don't have time to get into, but I think you can start to see it a little bit. And here I was going to go through reflection, but we don't have time. I'll try to write it in the reflection before I post the notes to DNKL's website for anybody who wants to pick up these notes that what I'm showing here on the screen, because I do want to get into at least talking about dependence on mere designation. So this one, I will just end our evening on a very simple and quick meditation. It's a reflection. It's not even a meditation. So here, in this is a classic dependence on mere designation reflection. It's called a snake in the rope. So you imagine being in a dimly lit place and unexpectedly seeing a snake just a few feet away. It startles the hell out of you, and you really are afraid. You have really intense, surprising kind of intense fear that arises. Then you turn the lights on, and relief like floods through you. You realize it's only a rope. There is no snake there. Now think, I am here, and feel a strong sense of I. Almost reflect back to when you had that moment of fear when you thought it was a snake. You had an intense feeling of I am afraid. It's a way to find sometimes that sense of I am here. And once you can establish that, you reflect that just as there's no snake in or on the rope, there is no I in or on the aggregates. There simply is the appearance of a person, but no inherently existing person exists. And this is a meditation that's meant to, through the experience of mistakenly labeling, just merely labeling, mistakenly labeling the rope as a snake, you had this real fear. And that gets right to, it's an appropriate place for us to end our series because it gets right to that place that brings you back to that kind of moment by moment reality of the first link of the 12 links. Mistakenly experiencing what is arising and either grasping at it or pushing it away, attachment or aversion to everything that leads to those karmic formations that then lead to the actual karmic imprints, and then the rest of the 12 links of dependent origination. Because things only really exist by mere designation. They do exist nominally, conventionally, but ultimately they don't have that quality. They have the quality of emptiness. Both can exist together. They don't have to cancel each other out. And this is all part of what you really want to be able to get clear in your mind and start to utilize doing these kind of meditations that transform your moment by moment experiences. So, quite short shrift to these meditations tonight because one could do a whole series on just any one of these. Sevenfold reasoning, diamond slivers, dependent arising, and spend endless gatherings every Tuesday night where you just dive in, which we're not going to do. Um, I think DNKL goes back to its regular Tuesday schedule, right, Chappelle, soon?
It appears that way according to the calendar.
Yes, good. So it's good. So please, we could turn off the recording, but before people leave, I just want to encourage you all to